Would you believe your own mother if she looked you in the eye and told you that you were the problem, while your brother stalked, cornered, and eventually assaulted the woman you loved? I didn't want to believe it either, but by the time this story's over, my brother is sitting in a prison cell. My father is facing his own criminal charges, and my mother has finally said out loud what none of us wanted to admit for 30 years. They built the monster themselves. Stay with me because this one gets worse before it gets better. I'm the older brother in this story. 3 years after I was born, my parents had Samuel, and from the day he came home from the hospital, the entire household rearranged itself around him. We grew up comfortable, upper middle class, small town Minnesota, both parents in real estate, both far more concerned with how the family looked to the neighbors than how it actually functioned behind closed doors. Samuel learned very early that consequences simply didn't apply to him. When he was 6, he smashed my gaming console because I wouldn't hand him the controller on demand. My parents' response was to buy him his own console and tell me I should have shared better. When he was 12, he fed my pet hamster chocolate, fully aware of what it would do to a small animal's system. My parents called it a tragic accident and told me maybe I shouldn't have kept a pet if I wasn't going to supervise it properly. In high school, he spread a rumor that ended my first serious relationship. And when I finally confronted my parents about it, they told me he was just being protective of my girlfriend. By the time we were both adults, there was a pattern running through my entire childhood that nobody in my family would name out loud, even though we all lived inside it. Samuel broke things, hurt people, or destroyed relationships. And somehow I was always the one who hadn't done enough to prevent it. I met Victoria at a coffee cart inside a hospital, of all places. I was there visiting a coworker who'd just had surgery. She was on her lunch break, and we ended up spending 20 minutes trash-talking the truly terrible hospital coffee. She's a pediatric nurse, sharp, funny, endlessly generous with people, always looking for the best version of someone even when the evidence didn't support it. I told her everything about my family history before I ever let her near them, because I wanted her prepared for whatever might come. She listened to all of it and then said the one thing I wish I'd argued with harder. Maybe it would be different now that everyone was grown up. I kept her existence a secret from my parents for 3 months. Eventually, I gave in and arranged a dinner. I should have trusted the 20 years of evidence sitting right in front of me. Samuel didn't even wait for a proper introduction. He shouldered our mother out of the way to be the first one to hug Victoria, held on far too long, and spent the entire meal manufacturing inside jokes with a woman he had known for exactly 10 minutes. He kept finding reasons to touch her arm, her shoulder. At one point, he tried feeding her off his own fork while staring at her like they were the only 2 people at the table. I watched Victoria physically step back just to reclaim a few inches of space. And she still smiled through the whole thing, because it was her first time meeting my family and she desperately wanted to make a good impression. Later that same night, when she offered to help clear the dishes, I found her cornered in the kitchen, my brother's hand braced against the counter right beside her hip, telling her she deserved someone far more exciting than his boring, unstable older brother. She had already told him to back off twice before I walked in. The look of relief on her face when she saw me said more than any explanation could have. A few days after that dinner, Victoria's phone started ringing with numbers she didn't recognize. Dead silence on the line or immediate hang-ups. Then the voicemail started, calling her cold and stuck up for turning down a better option, describing in specific detail what she'd been wearing to work that day. Proof that somebody had been watching her in person. She hadn't connected the dots yet, but I recognized one of the voices immediately. Samuel's old high school crew. Guys who still circle him because his parents' money keeps the good times flowing. She blocked the numbers and new ones started calling within hours. Then his friends began showing up physically at her hospital, lingering near the pediatric ward where she works, staring at her for stretches of time, muttering comments just loud enough for her to catch. One of them followed her out to the parking lot after a night shift, and she called me from inside her locked car, too frightened to drive home alone. She stopped eating properly. She started dreading the drive to her own job. I spent days building a case file. Voicemail recordings, screenshots of every message, hospital security footage that clearly showed Samuel's friend trailing her down a hallway. I drove to my parents' house, where Samuel still lived, rent-free, working at my father's office, and I laid every piece of it out in front of him. He smirked through the entire presentation, then looked me dead in the eye and said that maybe if Victoria wasn't so stuck up, people wouldn't feel the need to teach her a lesson. Something snapped and I hit him. Once, hard enough for a bloody nose and nothing more, and he wailed like I'd tried to kill him. My parents came running and never once glanced at the evidence spread across the table. My mother sobbed about her baby boy being attacked. My father screamed that I'd always been jealous of my brother and needed professional help for my anger. When I tried to explain the actual harassment happening to Victoria, my mother suggested that she must have led Samuel on and was now playing the victim after getting caught. I was told to get out and not come back until I'd apologized to him. We did everything the right way after that. Hours spent compiling screenshots, recordings, hospital footage, and 3 written statements from Victoria's own coworkers who had personally witnessed the harassment. The responding officer seemed genuinely concerned at first, until we mentioned that one of the men involved, Tyler, happened to be the son of a local police sergeant. His entire demeanor shifted in seconds. Suddenly, it was a matter of Victoria possibly misreading friendly attention from men who just happened to be hanging around a hospital. They offered to issue a few informal warnings and called that the end of what they could do. The very next day, Samuel showed up at my parents' house with a fresh black eye, claiming I'd attacked him a second time, despite the fact that I hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. My parents believed him instantly. My father threatened to cut me off financially and fire me from the family real estate business, apparently forgetting I'd never worked there in my life. It told me everything about how they actually saw me, not as a person, but as an extension of whatever story Samuel needed told that day. My mother eventually called, begging for one more chance to fix things as a family, insisting Samuel understood now and wanted to apologize properly. Against every instinct we had, we agreed to one dinner. Walking through the door, I knew instantly something was wrong. The house was packed with people, including Tyler and 2 of the other men who'd been stalking Victoria at her workplace. For 2 straight hours, it turned into a trial with Victoria seated as the defendant. My mother delivered a long speech about how Victoria was obviously jealous of Samuel's success and had been flirting with him from the very first dinner. My aunt suggested that a woman working exhausting night shifts around sick children was probably too sleep-deprived to distinguish reality from paranoia. Tyler described in specific and unsettling detail exactly what Victoria had worn on particular days at work, and somehow my family treated this as evidence that she had invited the attention, rather than proof that she was actively being stalked. When Victoria's breathing gave out under the pressure and she had to leave the room, my mother grabbed my arm and told me it was time to choose between my real family and an unstable girl who was clearly trying to cause problems. I chose Victoria. We walked out that night and didn't look back. Months later, my cousin Holly, the only relative who had ever seen through Samuel growing up, invited us to her wedding. She promised extra security specifically to watch him and a seating arrangement that kept us far from my parents' table. It should have been safe. Around 9 that evening, Victoria stepped away to the restroom alone. Minutes later, I noticed Samuel had also left his seat, and something in my stomach turned cold. I followed the direction she'd gone and heard her scream before I even reached the hallway. Samuel had her pinned against a wall, one hand clamped over her mouth, the other gripping her arm hard enough to leave bruising, her dress torn at the shoulder. Holly's husband and his brother, an officer from another jurisdiction, pulled him off her and had police there within minutes. When they arrived, my father actually tried to physically block the officers from handcuffing his son, while my mother screamed that the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Samuel, drunk and cornered, swung between sobbing that Victoria had seduced him and shouting threats at everyone around him. Several guests had it all on video, and combined with the wedding footage that showed him following her down that hallway, it became the foundation of a real case. In the weeks after, my parents worked the phones nonstop, rewriting the entire story into one where Victoria had lured Samuel into a secluded hallway and then cried assault out of revenge. They threatened to disown me unless she dropped the charges, then showed up uninvited at my apartment and caused enough of a scene that my own neighbors called the police on them. Victoria and I made our decision. She accepted a position at a hospital 300 miles away. I arranged to work remotely, and we left everything behind us. We built a quiet life after that. A small wedding with Holly's family and Victoria's relatives, a house in our new city, Victoria eventually becoming head pediatric nurse at her hospital, me making senior developer at my company. We were expecting our first daughter when the silence finally broke, 4 years later, with a call from my mother that I could barely understand through her crying. Samuel had gotten married the year before to a woman named Rachel, someone none of us had ever met. Rachel had missed 3 days of work, and when police performed a welfare check, they found her with 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and bruising across most of her body. Worse than that, my father had spent months actively helping cover it up, leaning on his real estate connections to pressure Rachel's family about their mortgage, threatening her job through a friend's company, convincing her own parents she was unstable and inventing stories. The exact same playbook they'd once used against Victoria. It all came apart after Rachel earned a promotion that would have made her financially independent for the first time. Samuel beat her badly enough that she couldn't go to work, and when she called my father in desperation, his advice was to put ice on it and remember her wedding vows. Her coworker called the police instead. Both Samuel and my father were arrested. Samuel for domestic violence, my father for witness intimidation and conspiracy. My mother wanted me to come home and support the family through the crisis. I finally said everything 4 years of silence had given me time to prepare. I asked her if she'd ever once considered that holding Samuel accountable as a child, for the hamster, for the rumors, for what he did to Victoria. might have meant Rachel never ended up in a hospital bed at all. She broke down completely and admitted for the very first time that they had always known something was deeply wrong with him and chose to cover it up instead of confronting it. I hung up the phone and blocked the number. Samuel eventually took a plea deal, 8 years for aggravated domestic violence with parole possible after 5. My father's case is still moving through the courts, his real estate license suspended, most of his old business partners quietly gone. Several of Samuel's ex-girlfriends and 2 women from his church have since come forward with their own strikingly similar stories, and those are now under investigation as well. My mother, unexpectedly, is the one who's actually changed. She started therapy, moved out, and filed for divorce. She sent me a long letter finally taking responsibility for enabling him his entire life, for never protecting me as a kid, for everything they put Victoria through. I haven't answered it yet. Maybe someday I will. Right now, watching our daughter grow up safe, surrounded by people who actually understand what a boundary is, feels like enough of an answer on its own. Rachel is rebuilding her life with her sister's support, fully cooperating with prosecutors, and the wider family has split cleanly down generational lines, the younger relatives standing with us and with her, the older ones still finding excuses. So here's the question I keep sitting with. How many warning signs does a family have to ignore? How many broken pets and ruined relationships and blocked exits before protecting someone stops being love and just becomes a choice to manufacture the next victim? My family had 30 years of warning signs and did nothing with any of them. I stopped waiting for them to notice a long time ago. And the one thing I'm certain of is that whatever cycle ran through that house for 2 generations, it ends with me, and my daughter will never have to learn any of this the way I did.